I was 16, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor, the smell of graphite and ink filling the small space as I carefully traced the lines of my latest architectural drawing. My pencil moved with purpose, my mind fully absorbed in the delicate balance of form and structure. Outside, the world was ordinary. Cars hummed past the house. The wind rattled the old window frame. But inside, I was building towers, hotels, and cities that belonged to me alone. The voice shattered the quiet. "You're a failure, Mark. This is my legacy, my hotel." It was my mother, Brenda. Her words were sharp, slicing through the air with the precision of a scalpel. I froze, pencil hovering over the paper, my stomach twisting. I didn't need to look up to know who she was yelling at. But then I did. I ran to the stairs, heart hammering, and saw him, my dad, Mark, leaning against the hallway wall, gray and exhausted, a suitcase at his feet. He looked like he had aged years in the span of a single afternoon. Our eyes met, and in that moment I saw everything I hadn't noticed before. The weight he carried, the disappointment that wasn't his own, the quiet defeat. He pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm sorry, Betla," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I can't stay here." And then he was gone. The front door slammed behind him, leaving me and my 8-year-old sister Mia standing in a silence so heavy it was almost audible. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something more oppressive. Abandonment, betrayal, a sudden vacuum where safety should have been. I glanced at Mia. Her wide eyes mirrored my own confusion and fear, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. We were both thinking the same thing. This house, our home, had just become a stranger. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own home? Like the walls around you belong to someone else entirely? That's what it felt like to me that day. Let me tell you about my family. My grandmother, Sharon, was a legend. She had started with a single roadside motel in Vermont, a tiny place with peeling paint and squeaky floorboards. From that modest beginning, she had built a $50 million chain of boutique hotels across New England. She wasn't just the founder, she was the heart of it all. Every hotel bore her touch, her meticulous attention to detail, her relentless pursuit of perfection. My mother, Brenda, was the marketing director. My dad, Mark, was the chief operating officer. Together, they were supposed to be the next generation, the team that would take over the empire. But my mother never really loved the work. She loved the status, the attention, the idea of power, not the building, not the architecture, not the soul of it. 3 months after my dad left, Mom announced she was getting married. Almost immediately, he moved in. Scott, a slick, charming optimization consultant with a smile that could light up a room. He doted on Mia, playing games with her, helping with homework, charming everyone with grand promises about international expansion. But me? I was invisible, a shadow, a piece of furniture he didn't know what to do with. Summoned me into the living room. "We have big news," Mom said, her smile bright and effortless. "Scott and I are moving to oversee the new European expansion." "What about me? What about me? What about Mia?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Mia's coming, of course," Mom said, waving her hand like it was nothing. "But you, Seline, don't be dramatic. You're about to start your last year of high school. It makes no sense to transfer you now." "So where am I supposed to live?" I asked. My voice was almost a whisper, small against the weight of the decision. Mom laughed, a short, cold sound that felt like glass breaking. "You'll stay with your grandmother. She's already agreed." It wasn't a discussion. It was a decree. I was being discarded. The night, lying in my bed surrounded by boxes that weren't mine, none of my things touched. I couldn't stop thinking. When did I become such a burden? When had I become someone who could be packed away like an afterthought? But looking back now, I realize it wasn't just about convenience. It was deeper than that. Mom had always lived in Grandma Sharon's shadow. She hated that I loved the business, that I spent hours sketching hotel layouts, that I shared the same vision as Grandma. Getting rid of me wasn't just about making room for Scott. It was a narcissistic, jealous act. She was eliminating the one person who reminded her of everything she wasn't. And just like that, at 16, my world had been upended. The walls that once felt safe now felt like cages, and the silence that followed my father's departure screamed louder than any argument. I was left with my sister, my grief, and a family legacy that seemed like it belonged to someone else entirely. Living with Grandma Sharon was nothing like home. It was quieter, yes, but it wasn't empty. Every corner of her house, every photograph and trophy whispered stories of triumph, of battles fought and won. Grandma Sharon was the kind of woman who didn't just build hotels. She built legacies. I soon realized that to live with her meant stepping into the rhythm of her world, a world of discipline, purpose, and history. The first morning I woke there, the scent of fresh coffee mingled with polished mahogany. I wandered into the kitchen and found Grandma Sharon reading the financial section of the newspaper, her sharp eyes scanning columns as if they were blueprints. "Morning," she said without looking up. "Sleep well?" "Yes," I mumbled. "You'll be staying here," she added, her voice calm but firm. "It's temporary, though sometimes temporary becomes permanent." Her words didn't comfort me. Temporary? It felt like exile. The home I had known, the life I had thought would carry me into adulthood, had been taken from me. And now, I was living in the shadow of the woman who had built it all. My grandmother's hotels were more than buildings. They were living entities, each room a story, each hallway a timeline of ambition and care. I began to understand why Grandma Sharon had been so successful. Attention to detail was everything to her, and she saw the world as a collection of spaces that needed to be nurtured, protected, and designed thoughtfully. It was during the first week that I discovered something both comforting and painful. I shared her eye. I could see the structure in chaos, the potential in decay, the art in function. While my mother had dismissed design as childish scribbles, I could walk into a room and immediately see what it needed: lighting, proportion, flow. Grandma Sharon noticed too, her eyebrows lifting ever so slightly when I commented on the symmetry of a window or the layout of the garden paths. Meanwhile, life with my mother and Scott became a distant, almost alien memory. I received the occasional text, Christmas greetings, birthday wishes, but they were hollow, perfunctory. There was no real connection, no acknowledgement of the years I had spent growing into someone competent, intelligent, and capable. Scott, the charming stepfather in training, had taken over our old home as if it were a stage set, and I was the invisible audience member, unseen and unheard. Mia, young and eager for affection, thrived in his attention, learning to laugh, to play, to be doted on. And me? I disappeared into the background, a ghost in my own life. I learned to stop expecting much. It was a lesson in survival. Instead, I turned inward, immersing myself in architecture. I spent hours drawing hotel layouts, sketching floor plans, imagining spaces that didn't yet exist. Each blueprint was a safe haven, a place where I had control, where mistakes didn't carry judgment or scorn. The more I drew, the more I felt alive. Yet even reminders of what had been stolen from me. The hotel chain my grandmother had built was the heart of the family, my mother's obsession, my father's pride, my grandmother's life's work. and I, the one who genuinely loved it, had been cast aside. Grandma Sharon, however, saw something in me that no one else had. She didn't smother me with attention or approval. She merely observed, allowed me space, and occasionally offered guidance. "You have the eye," she said once, pointing to a hand-drawn sketch of a hotel lobby I had been laboring over for hours. "Not just anyone sees the flow, the light, the way people will move. You do, and that is rare." Shameful. That word carried weight, but also a promise. It hinted that despite being discarded by my mother, despite the void left by my father's absence, there was still someone who believed in my vision, someone who saw the value in me, not for convenience, not for status, but for skill, integrity, and insight. Over the next few months, I settled into a rhythm. Classes at school, long hours drawing and revising architectural plans, evenings spent listening to Grandma Sharon recount stories of the hotels she had built from the ground up. Her stories were more than history lessons, they were life lessons. Each setback she described, each mistake, each gamble, paid off or failed, became a blueprint, not just for business, but for resilience. And slowly, I began to understand my mother in a way I hadn't before. Not with forgiveness, not with acceptance, but with clarity. Brenda had never loved the business itself. She had loved the image of success, the perception of power, the reflection of her mother's achievements without the work to earn it. And my presence, my genuine passion for architecture and hotels, it had been a threat, a mirror she didn't want to face. So, when she cast me aside to Europe while keeping Mia, it wasn't merely convenience. It was a calculated act of jealousy and narcissism. She had eliminated the one person who reminded her of everything she wasn't. I was left with a choice: remain bitter and lost, or find my place in the world on my own terms. The answer became clear in the quiet hours of Grandma Sharon's home, among sketches, blueprints, and the smell of polished wood. I would build my own path, not because anyone believed in me, but because I finally believed in myself. The exile had begun, but so had the awakening. Living with Grandma Sharon was nothing like the chaos I had known at home. It was quiet, measured, and deliberate, a sharp contrast to my mother's constant need to be noticed and Scott's flashy, performative charm. Here, I could breathe, think, and grow without feeling like a shadow in someone else's story. The first few weeks were disorienting. Grandma Sharon's house was filled with reminders of her life's work. Meticulously organized files, framed photographs of hotels in every stage of development, architectural sketches tacked to the walls. It was intimidating, yet it sparked something in me. I realized that I wasn't just learning about architecture, I was learning about legacy, about what it meant to create something that could outlive you. I buried myself in my studies. Each line I drew, each blueprint I refined, felt like a quiet act of defiance. I was reclaiming my life, one room, one floor, one hotel at a time. While my mother and Scott were off in Europe, immersed in their glamorous business venture, I was quietly becoming someone who could see and understand the soul of a building, not just its exterior facade. Scholarships was another matter. Without my mother's interference, I discovered I had space to breathe, to focus, to excel. Teachers began to notice me, not as someone's daughter, not as a placeholder, but as a student. With talent and vision. My friends, few as they were, started to see me for myself, the real me, not the version discarded by my family. Yet, even in the calm of Grandma Sharon's home, I felt the sting of absence. Mia thrived with Scott, constantly sending updates through voice messages and photos, and each one reminded me of the life I had been denied. My mother rarely called. When she did, it was brief, perfunctory, a reminder that I existed, but didn't matter. It would have been easy to grow bitter, to let resentment consume me. But I chose another path. I focused on architecture. On paper, I could control everything. Rooms could be perfect. Structures could be sound. Walls could support more than just ceilings. They could support dreams. Each design was a sanctuary, a place where I belonged and where my creativity could flourish without judgment. Grandma Sharon noticed. She didn't say much at first, just observed as I spent hours drafting plans for hotels I imagined for distant cities, for skylines that existed only in my mind. Then, one afternoon, she walked into my makeshift studio and leaned over my shoulder. "You understand this," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Not just the lines and angles, but the purpose behind them. You have my eye, Seline." I froze. Her praise wasn't casual. It carried weight, a validation I had never received from my mother or from Scott. It was recognition from someone who had built an empire from nothing, someone who had seen the value of patience, skill, and vision. "You also have your father's integrity," she added, her gaze steady. "You see things clearly, honestly. That is rarer than talent alone." Her words were a quiet thunder, echoing in the empty spaces of my heart. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a burden, not as an afterthought, but as a person capable of building, creating, and leading. Over the years, I flourished under her quiet guidance. We spent hours reviewing architectural journals, discussing the functionality of hotel lobbies, the psychology of guest experience, and the artistry of facade design. She challenged me, pushed me to think deeper, to question every choice, to anticipate every need. I absorbed it all, like a sponge, my skills growing alongside my confidence. And yet, life with Grandma Sharon wasn't just about skill. It was about resilience. I learned patience, endurance, and the subtle art of observation. I saw how she handled business calls with calm authority, how she could defuse conflicts with a single sentence, how she commanded respect without shouting, without posturing. Watching her, I realized that leadership was about more than being in charge. It was about understanding, about creating spaces where people could thrive. Even though I missed my father, even though the memory of being cast aside by my mother stung, I slowly began to feel a sense of home here. It wasn't about nostalgia or family loyalty. It was about belonging in a place that nurtured my mind, my skills, and my dreams. I had changed. The scared, discarded 16-year-old girl was no longer who I was. In her house, among her hotels and her legacy, I had found the tools, the guidance, and the courage to reclaim myself. The exile had transformed into an education. My grandmother wasn't just a mentor. She was the keeper of my potential, the one who had quietly waited for me to realize my own strength. And all the while, in the quiet hours when I sat sketching floor plans late into the night, I couldn't help but think. The family that discarded me had no idea that the person they had pushed away was becoming unstoppable. The awakening had begun. The morning of my 21st birthday began like any other at Grandma Sharon's home, yet there was an unusual tension in the air. The sun slanted through the tall windows of her study, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany desk. I had been summoned with a note tucked under my pillow. "Come to my office, now." Reluctantly, Grandma Sharon sat behind the desk, her posture perfectly straight, her expression unreadable. The room smelled of leather, old books, and polished wood, the scent of history and power. The walls were lined with photographs of hotels I had grown up admiring, each one a testament to her life's work. And now, it felt like I was standing in the heart of that empire. "Seline," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "Sit." I obeyed, heart pounding. My mind raced. Had I done something wrong? Was this some test? "I have been watching you for the last 4 years," she continued, leaning forward slightly. "Not just observing your work, but watching the way you think, the way you handle challenges. You don't just see these buildings, you understand them. You have my eye, Seline, and you have your father's integrity." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. The praise felt unreal, yet undeniable. It was more than recognition. It was validation of every hour I had spent drafting, designing, learning, and quietly building myself into someone capable. She reached under the desk and pushed a thick, leather-bound folder across the surface toward me. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The weight of it felt heavier than any book or blueprint I had ever held. "Happy birthday," she said, her eyes steady. Inside, I found deeds, trust documents, shareholder certificates. My fingers traced the embossed letters, my breath catching. "Grandma, what is all of this?" I asked, barely able to speak. "It's the hotel chain, Seline," she said simply. "It's all yours. Every property, every hotel, every piece of this legacy belongs to you." The room seemed to spin. I sat back, trying to comprehend the enormity of what I was holding. The $50 million empire my grandmother had built, the empire my mother had always coveted, was now entrusted to the very person she had tried to discard. I don't understand," I whispered. "Why me?" Grandma Sharon's gaze softened. "Because, Seline, you see the value of what others take for granted. You understand people, design, and integrity. You were never just a child in this family. You were always capable of this." The weight of her words settled over me. The anger and hurt I had carried for years, the betrayal, the abandonment, the feeling of being invisible, began to transform into something else. Not just relief, but purpose. The exile that had seemed like punishment had been, in fact, preparation. I thought of my mother, of Brenda's jealousy, her obsession with status over substance, and of Scott, whose charm had only masked his opportunism. They had underestimated me, cast me aside, but they had no idea that the person they had discarded had been quietly preparing to inherit everything. Remorse blurred my vision as I examined the documents. Each one represented trust, faith, and the culmination of a lifetime of hard work. This was not just a gift. It was a responsibility, a challenge, and a confirmation that my passion and perseverance mattered. Grandma Sharon stood, moving to place a hand gently on my shoulder. "Seline, this empire is not just bricks and mortar. It is the legacy of our family, and now it is yours to guide, protect, and grow. I have every confidence you will honor it." I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. I want her to begin, is fast. I'm just wait for Seline. I nodded. I find that word so loved. I nodded, my family who will discovered, have lesson to do receiving me. I nodded, my voice cost additions as well as in Soka time. I still know, I still don't stop, I still don't. I nodded, my voice cost additions. I catch you with this world. I told you the 10, it will not. I find. I thought I've been what just you. I nodded, my voice tights together. I finally, then it's much from me. I want her to begin, to try to look at. I nodded, my voice cost additions. I could also determine the company. I find the goodness, and Genry. I mother of her stories that the person was not for our family, and it was one of dead, and was generally what comfortable discover. I know, I personal, I will, Grandma, I promise. As I left the study, the folder clutched tightly in my hands. I felt a shift inside me. The girl who had once been ignored, cast aside and underestimated, had emerged from exile stronger, wiser, and ready. The years of isolation, of hard work, and of quiet observation had shaped me into someone capable of leadership and vision. Outside, the sunlight seemed brighter, the air clearer. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own life. I felt at home, in my skills, in my purpose, and in my legacy. The empire was mine, and with it came freedom, responsibility, and the chance to reshape not only the hotels, but the story of my own life. For the first time, I realized that being discarded had been a detour, not the end. And now, it was time to reclaim what was always meant for me. The first morning as the official owner of the hotel chain, I woke with a mixture of anticipation and disbelief. The leather-bound folder from Grandma Sharon sat on my desk, unopened for the night, a quiet reminder of the weight of responsibility and the gift of trust. I walked through the halls of the original hotel, each step echoing softly against the polished floors, and for the first time, I felt truly in my element. Grandma Sharon had left me with more than documents. She had left me with knowledge, mentorship, and faith. I remembered her words clearly. This empire is not just bricks and mortar. It is the legacy of our family. And now, that legacy was mine to honor, shape, and grow. I began by walking through the properties I had known since childhood. The hotels were familiar, yet transformed in my eyes. They were no longer simply spaces my grandmother had built. They were canvases upon which I could leave my own mark. I inspected the lobbies, reviewed the layouts, and made notes on design improvements. Every decision I made reflected not only functionality, but also my vision. A combination of my grandmother's wisdom, my father's integrity, and my own creativity. The business felt like home, the past lingered. I thought of my mother, of Brenda's cold dismissal, of her relentless pursuit of status over substance. I thought of Scott, whose charm had disguised indifference, and I realized that their choices had shaped me as much as they had hurt me. They had underestimated me, discarded me, and yet in doing so, they had unwittingly strengthened my resolve. I called a board meeting, formally taking the reins. For the first time, I sat at the head of the table, papers organized, plans outlined, vision clear. The executives and managers, many of whom had worked under Grandma Sharon for decades, looked at me with a mixture of respect and curiosity. I presented my ideas, my strategies for expansion, and my vision for the chain's future. It wasn't about emulating the past, it was about evolving it, innovating while honoring what had been built. Change isn't always easy, I said, glancing around the room, but respect for our foundation guides every decision. We build on what's strong, remove what's weak, and innovate where it matters. This is our legacy, and it's ours to grow responsibly. For the first time, I felt a surge of confidence that wasn't just professional, it was personal. I wasn't just leading a business, I was reclaiming a part of myself that had been dismissed, undervalued, and overlooked. Every blueprint I had drawn in isolation, every night spent studying architecture and business, every moment of quiet growth with Grandma Sharon had led to this. Months passed, and the hotels began to reflect my influence. Lobbies were redesigned to enhance guest experience. New properties were considered for environmentally conscious construction, and staff training emphasized both efficiency and empathy. Slowly, the empire began to shift, not in its foundation, but in its soul. It became more than a business. It became a reflection of who I was, a blend of passion, integrity, and vision. Yet, amidst success, I didn't forget the personal lessons. I reached out to Mia often, strengthening the bond we had as sisters, ensuring she felt valued and loved. I maintained a polite, distant relationship with my mother, knowing she would never understand the depth of my commitment or the sincerity of my care. And I thought of my father, whose integrity had always inspired me, hoping that wherever he was, he felt proud. Sitting in the executive suite of the flagship hotel, I looked out over the city skyline. The buildings below were like the blueprints of my own life, carefully constructed, resilient, and full of potential. I realized that being discarded had not been the end of my story. It had been the beginning of my transformation. For had survived neglect, navigated betrayal, and endured exile. And through it all, I had discovered something essential. My value was never determined by those who failed to see it. My legacy wasn't inherited. It had been earned through resilience, vision, and unwavering dedication. Turning back to my plans, there was work to do, hotels to design, and people to inspire. But for the first time, I felt fully, unapologetically, and irrevocably in my place. The empire was mine, yes, but more importantly, I was mine. And in that moment, I realized the truth I had discovered through years of challenge. Being discarded had not broken me. It had built me.